There are times we might want our package to make use of user-defined configurations. You might have seen that in most Adonis.js packages. In this lesson, we will cover how to do that. Adonis.js uses the concept of template files to make files in packages publishable or available for use in projects. This can be config files, contract files, view files, or any other files. Publishing files or making them available in projects can be done in two ways. The first one is what I call the automatic way, and the second is the manual way. In this lesson, we'll be looking at the first way. Now let's get practical. So instead of hardcoding the session key, the timeout value, and the URL to redirect to, we are going to refactor our package such that it gets these values from a config file. By convention, template files are placed inside a templates directory. So we are going to create a templates directory in the root of our project. Of course, we can rename this to whatever we want, provided that we specify the correct name when making use of template files. So inside the templates directory is where we will have our template files. And for this course, we'll be needing just one template file, which will be the config file. So let's create the file, which I will call confirm-password with a .txt extension. We can structure the files inside the template directory however we want. For example, if we have multiple template files, we can place them in their respective directories. So to make things pretty straightforward, I'm going to create a config directory and move the file inside the directory, which makes sense because this is a config template file. Before we start filling the content of the file, we are going to head over to our typings directory and inside the confirm-password.cs file and create the types for the config file. So I'm going to add it here. So export interface, and the name of the interface will be confirm password config. And it will contain three properties, which are the session key name, which will be a string, then the password timeout, which will be a number, then lastly redirect to, which will be a string. Now we can fill in the content of the template file. First, we are going to import the confirm password config we just created. Then we are going to create a confirm password config object. So const confirm password config, which will be a type of confirm password config. And it's going to contain the three properties we defined in the interface. So session key name. I'm going to grab the value from the middleware. Then password timeout, which is going to be 60 seconds. Then lastly, redirect to. Again, I'm going to copy from here. Then finally, we can export confirm password config as the default export. So now we have the template file. You notice that though the template file is a text file, but at the point of configuring this package in the project where we want to use it, Adonis.js is going to convert this text file to a TypeScript file. So that is why we are writing valid TypeScript code inside the template file, because at the end of the day, it's going to be a TypeScript file. Next, let's figure out how to make use of this config file. For that, we are going to update the confirm password middleware class and the confirm password class to accept this config object. So we are going to add a constructor, which is going to accept the config object. So private confirm password config, which will be a type of the confirm password config interface. And I'm going to do the same thing for the confirm password class. Let me put this in. Next, we need to update the provider to pass along the config object when instantiating these classes. Here, we are going to resolve the Adonis config module from the IOC container. So, this.app.container, that is the IOC container .resolve binding, and the binding we want to resolve from the container is Adonis/core/config. We've gotten the whole Adonis config module, but we need to streamline that and get just the confirm password config object. So we're going to call the get method on the config module and pass it the name of our config file, which is confirm dash password. Remember I said the confirm dash password.txt file will be renamed to confirm dash password.txt. So here we are referring to the TypeScript file, which will be inside the config directory. More on that later. The get method also accepts an optional default value, which we are going to set to an empty object. So in case this config file is not available, it's going to default to an empty object. Let's save this in a variable. Now we can pass the config object to the classes. Now let's head back to the classes and make use of the config object. So now instead of hard coding this value here, we can get it from the config. So this dot confirm password config dot session key name. Then here this dot confirm password config dot password timeout. Then lastly this dot confirm password config dot redirect to. Then we'll do the same thing for the confirm password class. This dot confirm password config dot session key name. Now we've successfully refactored our previous implementation to make use of the values in the config file. But there is one last thing we need to do, which will be inside the package.json file, inside the Adonis.js session. So here is where we will register or inform Adonis.js about the template files, or in our case, template file. If we take a look at the structure of the Adonis.js session again, from the sync module, you'll notice that we have a template object that can contain the following properties. So we can specify a base path. For example, if you are using a different name other than the conventional name, that is the templates directory name I mentioned earlier. So if you are using a different one, we can specify it using the base path. For the template file itself, it can be an array of any of these. So it can be an array that will contain a type of a string, or it can be an array that will contain objects in this form. So let's define the template session. This is going to be an object. And the template we are working on is the config template, which is going to be an array. Config here is the config directory in an Adonis.js application. So depending on the template files you are working with, this can be contracts, resources, views, or any of the standard Adonis.js directories. You can see a list of those directories in the Adonis.js application module. So here is the standard or default directories for Adonis.js applications. So the value can be any of these. So inside this array, we can specify the template files, which is inside the config directory, then the name of the file, which is confirm-password.txt. This will be relative to the templates directory. So if you are not using a templates directory, you can as well pass the base path and specify the directory that you are using, which will be inside the build directory. Then the name of the directory you are using, in my case, which is templates, which is the default. But just to show you how it works, I'm going to define it. Now, when we install this package and run the configure command, Adonis.js is going to take this file, rename it to .ts, and move it to the config directory of the Adonis application that this package is being installed in. So this is one way to define template files. Now let's look at another way. I'm going to cut this, and instead of providing a string in the array, I'm going to provide an object. The object is going to contain a src property, which stands for source, and the value is going to be the template file, which is config/confirm-password.txt. Also, it's going to contain a dest property, which stands for destination, and the value is going to be just confirm-password. Again, when this package is installed and configured, Adonis.js will take this file, rename it to .cs, and move it to the config directory in the application the package is being installed in. You might have noticed something though, that in the destination we didn't provide the config directory as we have in the source. What that means is that with the first method, so if I just bring it back here, the confirm-password.cs file is going to be inside a config directory that will be inside the project config directory, because Adonis.js is going to treat this as both the source and as the destination. So if you know you'll be using this approach, it's best to move this directly inside the template, so you can do this. So now the file will be created directly inside the config directory. But personally, I like to be explicit with things. So I tend to use this approach where I put each file in their respective directory and use this method to explicitly tell Adonis.js what is what. Lastly, we need a way to copy the templates directory inside the build directory. For that, we are going to install an npm package called copy files, and we'll install it as a dev dependency. Once installed, we are going to add a new script which we will call copy files, which will make use of the copy files package. And we're going to tell it to copy everything inside the templates directory with a .txt extension and copy them into the build directory. Then let's update the compile script to include the copy script. Npm run copy files. Then we can add the templates directory inside the files array build/templates. Now let's republish and test to make sure everything is still working. If we take a look at the build directory, we should now have the templates directory there as well. Next, let's update the package in our application to pull the latest updates. Then we'll configure the package. Node is configure. I'm going to copy the name to save some typing. As you can see now, the file has been created inside the config directory, and if we take a look at it, it is just as we defined it in the template file. Let's test to be sure that the package is using these values. I'm going to use a different value here. And I know for sure that this route doesn't exist, so we should get an error if the package is using this value. So let's head over to the browser. I'm going to log in. Sure, we got the expected error, which means the package is making use of the config details. Let me revert this back. And go back to the dashboard. So I can now confirm my password. And voila, I'm in. So this is how to make use of template files in an Adonis.js package. In this lesson, we looked at what I call the automatic method. In the next lesson, we're going to look at the other method, which involves us doing things manually.